Okay. Commissioners, tab 24 is an action item for the adoption of the 2018 Trade Corridor Enhancement Program guidelines. These guidelines build upon the effort that went into the development of the California Freight Investment Program guidelines, which started 1 year ago in October of 2016. Since beginning the guideline development process last year, Commission staff have held 12 workshops, presented at the California Freight Advisory Committee meeting, and worked with stakeholders representing regional agencies, local governments, private industry, and advocacy groups. The proposed final guidelines represent a collaborative effort from all of our stakeholders to address key issues and concerns. The most recent changes were shown in Attachment A in your handout, and they're underlined. Based on our input from the statewide teleconference call, which was held this past Monday, staff is proposing another change, which is shown on the pink one-page summary handout regarding proportional spending or non-proportional spending. Along with those changes, we have two additional changes that we would like to propose now. And that is one change would be to include the STIP funds as a matching fund source. And then the second item is very similar to what Mitch presented for the local partnership program, where instead of having the 10% savings language, we would replace that with having the savings go back to the regional programming targets that the savings actually come from. So in conclusion, staff greatly appreciates our stakeholder participation and partnership in this endeavor and looks forward to reaching our ultimate goal of adopting a program of projects in May of 2018. With the noted changes, staff recommends approval of the Trade Corridor Enhancement Guidelines.
Second. Motion by Tavaloni, second by Dunn. Before we do, we have speakers. Kevin Hamilton, and then Domingo Gonzalez. Please.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe I've already introduced myself. I'm also part of the California Clean Freight Coalition and a founding member of that entity, and have been working on freight and goods movement issues for almost 20 years now. And I'm also on the state's Environmental Justice Advisory Committee working on the 2030. Now I was on the 2020 scoping plan as well, greenhouse gas scoping plan. And transportation is one of the areas that I feel are critical to both our state's economy and to our state's health in general. So I want to thank you for the work that you've done on these guidelines. I think that overall they're very good. We've submitted a letter to you as well, and other members of the group will speak more to that as we move along. I do really support this idea of this intelligent transportation system. Been to a lot of transportation meetings here over the last couple of years, and I hear that over and over again, how that's a method of increasing the efficiency of the system. It does require a certain amount of capacity on the part of the particular transportation entity using that technology. However, trucking firms have to be of a certain size to be able to take advantage of that kind of technology, though a lot of the smaller class 4 through 7 trucking groups could use this, and in fact do use it to their benefit. I think having that recognized and how that's constructed and repeating that over and over again, and in fact mandating it, is critically important. We also want to see that the residents of communities most negatively impacted by freight transport are meaningfully involved in this engagement effort to support the likelihood that nominated projects are ones that best achieve a critical environmental and community benefits. And I mean that when I say everyone. We are here, and our voice is for disadvantaged communities, but make no mistake, having lived in LA for quite a period of time before I moved to Fresno, we all live in that environment. We're all affected by it. So expanding Roadways is one of the approaches here that is a failed approach. Getting people onto transit is helpful, but didn't quite make it. So we need to push on to new strategies. One of the things that I'd like to suggest is a fast track highway for trucks, dedicated lanes and incentives for off-hours operations. During those off-hour period, you could actually expand that to 2 lanes, say between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. For people like my son who travel regularly between Marietta and the Bay Area and the South Bay, those fast track lanes are very helpful for cars, but yet you still see trucks backed up and participating in backing up those roadways. So new strategies, new ways of thinking about that are really important. Just adding lanes without any kind of condition attached to them or use, I think is just going down the same pathway we're already on, because every other person on the road will see that as an advantage as well. So thank you very much for your time.
Domingo, then Shreyas Jakar.
Thank you, Commissioners. Domingo Gonzalez, City of Barstow. I'm representing the local governments. I appreciate the staff to get us involved with it, because without their guidance and letting us know about it, as a local government, I would not have known about this program. So I do appreciate the staff. I did have a little concern with the congestion corridor and the trade commission, or the trade aspect of this. A local agency cannot apply to these on their own. They have to go through a transportation agency. But the cities themselves are the ones that are getting the development, getting the trucking in, and moving the freight through the towns. My City of Barstow has the major BNSF through our town, plus it's the corridor to Las Vegas and up northern California. And without us being able to be a part of the congestion or trade on our own to get some of these funds, we rely heavily on other people to see our needs and to move it forward. So in the legislation, I would like to see something where it impels them to either talk to the cities to get it moving, or allow us to actually apply for them. With that, I am open to any questions.
I think, Mitch, could you clarify? I believe that cities are eligible to apply for the plans on page 7 of the guidelines.
Yeah, so under the Trade Corridor Enhancement Program, cities and counties are eligible to apply on their own. They do not have to go through their MPO or RTPA.
Thank you.
Other questions? Thank you. Shreyas, and then Debbie Hale.
Good afternoon, Chair Alvarado and Commissioners. Shreyas Jutgar with Coalition for Clean Air. We're one of the members of the California Cleaner Freight Coalition that's been involved in developing and now implementing the Sustainable Freight Action Plan here in the state. And we've been involved in this process since the beginning, since October, or I thought it was November 2016, but I guess we've been here since October talking about these guidelines. So I want to definitely thank Don and Mitch for facilitating the workshops, for the meetings they've had with us one-on-one, and for taking many of our comments, and we see those reflected in these guidelines before you today. So I definitely want to thank the process and appreciate the process and the outcome. And at the same time, we think that there are still several shortcomings in these guidelines, and that really do need to be addressed. You know, I want to just kind of pick up on 2 comments that were made here earlier from others. One was from Commissioner Gardino, where you said, you know, where you stand is based on where you sit. And that couldn't be more true of our perspective on these guidelines. You know, in our coalition, we include environmental justice and public health groups, and that's really the perspective we bring to this program. And what we see is, you know, this is building on the Trade Corridor Improvement Fund from 10 years ago. What we have not seen, though, is measurable improvement at the neighborhood level. And I'm talking about those disadvantaged communities. These are census tracts, just designated communities where, you know, they're near freight facilities, they're along those trade corridors. These diesel emissions are concentrated in those communities. The health impacts are concentrated in those communities. And so, you know, again, we presented a letter that's in your packet that really outlines and describes not only these deficiencies, but our recommendations for addressing them. We want to be constructive. We know that the freight infrastructure system is a key part to making sure we reduce the pollution that comes from moving goods. We also do want to just say that while our focus is, of course, on reducing emissions and making sure that those are emission reductions in these disadvantaged communities, we also think these are recommendations that support a vibrant and a sustainable freight infrastructure system. And so it's not an either or. This is about achieving all of our objectives together. And so you heard some comments about, congestion reduction. We absolutely agree that we need to reduce congestion. This has an effect on emissions as well as freight efficiency in terms of industry competitiveness. But we do think that there needs to be not just again, another phrase you hear is we don't want to reinvent the wheel. Well, sometimes you got to change your tires. Sometimes you need a whole new car. This is a time where we really need to be doing things very differently in order to actually build that kind of modern, sustainable freight infrastructure system that Californians need and deserve. And so with that, I'll just end by saying, we need to think more boldly. We need to do more. We'll remain involved in making sure these recommendations are seen through, and we ask for your support for the recommendations we've outlined to make sure, again, that we're thinking more boldly in how we design our freight infrastructure system. I'll take any questions if there are any at this time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Debbie Hale, and then Jared Sanchez. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Commissioners. I just want to thank your staff, Don and Mitch, for being so responsive to all of our comments. By the time we wrote our letter and got it to you all yesterday, we talked about it this morning, and staff had already responded and said, I think that we can accommodate your issue in the guidelines. And I just want to give you a heads up that we're hoping to apply for trade corridor funding for our 156-101 project. As you know, US 101 is a major trade corridor. If you've ever been on it, you know how you're fighting the trucks in that area. And 156 happens to have a major distribution hub on it as well. We're also looking at something very innovative for our area, which is levying a toll in order to build a new expressway and to redo that whole 101-156 interchange. But we can't use the tolling revenue for right-of-way purchase. We can only use it for construction because you can't issue your revenue bonds until your toll is in place or practically in place. And so the flexibility that staff has said will be allowed in the guidelines with regards to being able to have a lot of matching funds in the construction side, but not as much of the matching funds on the right-of-way side will really help us to be competitive for funding under this program, accessing a bunch of money that wouldn't materialize if we didn't get some of that upfront money. So thank you for your flexibility of that in the guidelines. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Jared Sanchez and Chanel Fletcher.
Hello again, it's Jared Sanchez with the California Bicycle Coalition, also a member of the Cleaner Freight Coalition that Shreyas just mentioned. Of course, want to thank CTC staff again, Mitch and Don, speaking now probably about this program, and they've been great throughout the process, through all of our meetings. As Shreyas mentioned, there was definitely a lot of improvement from the original CFIP program and guidelines, so we really appreciate that. As our letter states, there's a variety of concerns. I just want to bring up one that kind of get into some of the details here, and certainly the most alarming from our standpoint. It's around the very explicit provisions within statute, within SB 103, the trailer bill that clarifies the program, that the final guidelines for this freight program completely ignores, and it's regarding disadvantaged and low-income communities. It explicitly states that the evaluation shall specify, specifically assess localized impacts in disadvantaged communities, and that nominated projects reduce negative community impacts, comma, especially in disadvantaged communities. Simply following section 39711 of the Health and Safety Code without actually evaluating the impact does not address these specific provisions. To fully satisfy these provisions, we recommend incorporating an assessment of the impact on disadvantaged communities in the evaluation criteria, which is section 16 of the guidelines. SB 103 is clear that the guidelines must actually factor this into a transparent process to evaluate projects. Community impact factors vaguely stated in section 16 is insufficient. Furthermore, since the only place disadvantaged or low-income communities is mentioned in the guidelines, it's in section 17, the project nominations, it is even more unclear how the descriptions of needs and benefits submitted by applicants will actually be incorporated into the evaluation process in section 16. I just wanted to highlight that. It's certainly in our letter, and at this point, as they're about to be adopted by the commission, certainly we would love to talk more about this, or if not this round, certainly to address it in future rounds for this specific program. Thank you.
Jim?
Mr. Chair, and
Yeah.
to the Executive Director, I think some of the comments that we've heard today are good, and I appreciate what you just said, that if not this round, future rounds, and I would only ask that staff perhaps sit down and kind of hear what some of these issues are so we can try to be as sensitive as possible. Obviously, we've got a big state, there's a lot of issues, but it's important that we understand some of these things as well, and I think it's good to hear your comments, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Paul?
You mentioned the benefit cost analysis that, so in section 17, subsection 19, there is the benefit cost analysis, and that one does take into account underserved communities into that analysis, and you're saying that's not adequate?
I think what we're recommending is to, I guess, honor the statute to say that it be part of the evaluation or screening criteria process, which is what section 15 and 16. I guess given that it's mentioned in SB 103 about like it being tied to evaluation, our recommendation is to it be incorporated specifically into that section. There's a community impact factors, but there's no mention about explicitly disadvantaged.
But that's
communities.
that you would agree that that's in the Caltrans Life Cycle Benefit Cost Analysis Model 6, right?
Is that something that was added? I don't know, and that might be true, but I don't think that's going to feed into section 16 of the evaluation criteria, unless I'm wrong about that.
Okay. Don,
And the rating and scoring
clarify
process.
that when we're complete here.
So I'm not a CalBC expert, but we have been working with the Air Resources Board to make some updates to the CalBC on the air quality side. And we were also looking into some public health updates that are within that model. So I believe that model will not take into account Jared's comments.
Okay.
But staff is committed to, in the next round, making a more robust analysis of the disadvantaged communities and low-income communities for our next guideline development process. So yes, as to Commissioner Medaffer's request, we want to be able to be more engaged and learn more about the impacts so that we can find more different ways on how to address it better in the next set of guidelines.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Chanel, and then Kenneth Cow.
So I just wanted to quickly say, I think, a couple of things. I think one thing is that we are very, very appreciative of the strong alignment with state agency freight plans. I think one of our concerns was just that there's a process happening through ARB and there's a process happening through CTC, and how are those talking to each other? And so I think we're very encouraged about that. I think, again, kind of a climate plan, our focus is really on land use and transportation and the connection with climate change. So we're very encouraged to see that. I think there's a focus on improving air quality, addressing climate change, and really promoting public health within the freight sector, because I think we know how important that is. So those are things that we're very excited about. I think we're also very excited about the fact that applicants, when they're kind of doing these projects, they have to describe how local residents and communities-based organizations are engaged. I think that's a very important key thing that we want to see, and so we're happy to see that as well. We're happy to know that with the final project, it has to talk about how it's going to address community-identified needs. Again, another big thing that we're very supportive of. I will echo my colleague Jared's concerns around the evaluation piece. I know we had that clarified. I think that that's one of the things that we want to see in terms of prioritizing projects. We would love to see kind of all of this great community work happening in that evaluation and prioritization section, and not just like in the Cal Benefits, the benefit cost model. So we are looking forward to working closely with Dawn and others on the CTC staff, coming back to the commission, I think, to continue to improve these guidelines. And thank you guys again for all of your hard work for the commissioners and for staff.
Thank you. Ken?
Hello again, Commissioners. I'm going to operate under the assumption that you can never say thank you too many times. So I'm going to thank staff and Commissioners again for their recommendation. With Dawn's additional recommendations, I think we like it very much and support staff's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so action item. There's a motion on the floor. Further questions?
Second.
And
We already had a motion.
The motion was already on the floor. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 25 is a hearing. Teresa.
Commissioners, item 25 is an information item. This is the Northern hearing to take public comment on the draft guidelines for the Congested Corridors Program. The Solutions for Congested Corridors Program, created under SB 1, will receive an annual appropriation of $250 million to fund projects that make specific improvements to reduce congestion in highly traveled and highly congested corridors by providing more transportation choices while preserving the character of the local community and creating opportunities for neighborhood enhancement projects. Statute requires that prior to adoption of the guidelines, the Commission holds at least 2 public hearings. Statute further requires that 30 days prior to the adoption of the guidelines, a copy of the guidelines be transmitted to the Joint Legislative Budget Committee, the Senate Transportation and Housing Committee, and the Assembly Transportation Committee. To date, staff has held 4 public workshops, and has held numerous meetings with individuals, various stakeholders. We have 1 more workshop scheduled for October 24th in Los Angeles. The draft guidelines included in your package address legislative requirements. It incorporates input we've received from various stakeholders and Commission procedures for programming and delivery. I will briefly go over some sections that are unique to the program. Under Section 4, Programming Cycle, staff is proposing the initial cycle be a 4-year program. Subsequent cycles will be a 3 years of programming with 2 new years of capacity added to the program. Each subsequent cycle will be adopted by November 1st of every even year. Under Comprehensive Corridor Plan section, statute requires that every project funded from this program be included in a comprehensive corridor plan. Given that the agencies have not had time to develop such plans, for the initial program, staff proposes all nominated projects be included in a multimodal corridor plan. We will accept a wide range of existing corridor plans that are specific to the transportation corridor and prepared by a local agency. In subsequent cycles, projects nominated for funding must be in a comprehensive corridor plan. The funding constraints section, staff proposes that this program only fund the construction component. Staff also proposes that this program does not supplant other committed funds and that the program does not participate in cost increases. Under the evaluation criteria section, statute specifies that each project must be scored using the following criteria: safety, congestion, accessibility, economic development, and job creation and retention, furtherance of state and federal ambient air standards and greenhouse gas emissions reduction standards pursuant to the California Global Warming Solution Act of 2006, efficient land use, matching funds, and project deliverability. Staff proposes a tiered approach with a primary evaluation, a secondary evaluation, and a deliverability evaluation criteria. Staff proposes that the primary evaluation criteria be congestion. The nomination should address how extensive is the problem of congestion in the corridor and how well will the proposed solution address the problem. The secondary evaluation are the co-benefits of the proposed solution. These include safety, accessibility, economic development and job creation and retention, air quality and greenhouse gases, and efficient land use. Under the deliverability criteria, it will include match. Staff proposes that no minimum match be required under this program. However, as leveraging other funds is desired, match will be evaluated and scored. The higher the match, the better the project will score. Collaboration. Projects jointly nominated and jointly funded by multiple agencies will be given priority under this program. Early delivery date will also be a priority, and cost effectiveness of the project will be evaluated. For the most part, stakeholders support the approach we have taken on the guidelines. We have had a few comments in regards to how we have tiered the criteria. Specifically, it was proposed that accessibility and air quality and greenhouse gas reduction criteria be part of the primary evaluation criteria. We did not incorporate this suggestion as staff believes that the purpose of this program is to address congestion on highly traveled and highly congested corridors, and the solutions proposed should be a balanced set of improvements that will be demonstrated based on the co-benefits that are achieved. This concludes my remarks. Unless you have specific questions, staff recommends the chair opens the Northern California hearing for public comment.
Could you clarify the issue of how someone would use a toll lane as a match if you can't issue the bonds until after you are, the issue that came up in trade corridors, and this would come up with people trying to do hot lanes as a part of their portion of their match for this. How would that work?
Well, this program is construction only, so by the time it's ready to list, the bonding should already be in place. A hot lane is eligible project. The funding package, they would need to provide other source of match in order for it to be able to score better.
Okay.
But because it's construction, the bonding should already be in place.
Okay.
Okay, with that, we'll open the public hearing. Michael Pimentel? And then after him would be Matt Robinson.
Chair Alvarado and Commissioners, Michael Pimentel with the California Transit Association. I want to start off by thanking the Commission staff and Director Branson for a really robust public outreach campaign and their taking in of stakeholder feedback. As a result of that work, the draft that's before you today is a measurable improvement over the discussion draft that was first introduced some months ago. And we think it strikes a correct balance in terms of the types of projects that it would bring online. We look forward to engaging in this process as it moves forward, and our members, which comprise of about 80 transit operators in the state, look forward to participating in this program.
Thank you. Matt, and then Jared Sanchez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Matt Robinson on behalf of the San Mateo City County Association of Governments. We've been following this program very closely given our interest in the US 101 corridor. If you'd asked me after they released the discussion draft on the 21st, I would have had a lot of comments to make today. But I would just have to commend your staff for the job that they've done and hearing all of the feedback from all of us along the way at the various workshops that Teresa mentioned. Mitch and Teresa, I think, have done a good job of listening to the feedback that they've received and incorporating that into the latest version of the guidelines that was released on October 6th. Teresa and I are still discussing some issues related to matching requirements, and I'm confident we'll work those out. But with that, I would just like to say thank you for your time. Thank you for all your work. Congratulations to Mitch on your promotion. Eric, we're going to miss you. The rest of you with promotions, it's been a pleasure. Thank you, sir.
Love your show. Forgot Laura's here.
Jared Sanchez, and then Chanel, I'm sorry.
Well, they two had to leave. Yeah, they both had to leave.
I'm sorry?
They had to leave.
Okay, Chanel's gone too?
4-minute savings, great.
Okay, Joshua Stark, it looks like. Stark.
Probably by some people in this room. Hi, Joshua Stark, State Policy Director for Transform. Just to make a few comments that I'll get off here in just a second. But also to note that we have written comments we're developing based on the new draft guidelines that we'll be sending in shortly. Very quickly, though, just to note that the statute has been clear about VMT reduction being an important factor to alleviating congestion, and we would like to ensure that again gets mentioned in the guidelines, that VMT and using VMT reduction should be a primary way to relieve congestion. And we would also like to add that you can also include person throughput rather than vehicle throughput in reducing congestion. Because if you're looking at X number of people trying to get to different places within a corridor, and you reduce, you can increase the number of people that move through that system without increasing their vehicles. That by default is a congestion improvement. Also, additionally, I can just add here that we currently don't believe there's enough mention yet of the impact on disadvantaged or low-income communities adjacent to some of the most congested corridors in the state. These communities are predominantly disadvantaged because of their location near these highly congested corridors, and we believe that the statute is clear in trying to address the impacts that relate to them, and we would love to ensure that the guidelines do so as well. We want to thank you all and thank the staff for the process. We understand some of these processes have been sped up with reason, and we recognize that reason, and we look forward to working with you throughout the following year to ensure that this becomes an iterative process, and we actually are hopeful that will be the case. A slightly broader comment relating to SB1 implementation and what's coming up next year with regards to SB1. We as representatives of a larger community of folks, if you look at the ATP, for example, 48% is represented as a disadvantaged community under the ATP guidelines. These are communities of folks who are disproportionately impacted by the use of the kinds of fees and taxes that will be collected, and we want to ensure that the programs that these are funding benefit these communities to the same level. And we want to be able to go back to those community members and say, this is an additional burden, and be honest with them, but the benefits are far outweighing this burden, and we can take our limited capacity as community members and organizations who represent these communities to say it's worth your support. But we have to come back to them with programs that are worth their support, or else we're just going to get kicked out. So I just wanted to be very clear. We want to be in that position come next year to be able to strongly support and advocate support for SB1, because we feel that by and large the overall benefits far outweigh the penalties. Thank you. Now I'll be heading off to duck season on Saturday. Maybe with you. Yeah.
Kenneth Cow and then Sarkis.
Hello again, Commissioners. I just wanted to say that the draft guidelines as they're presented we feel like they're moving in the right direction. We think the framework is something that we would support with a few minor tweaks. So we would be working with your staff and providing a comment letter very shortly. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Sarkis and then Ron DeCastro.
Thank you, Chair. Commissioners, Assemblyman Frazier. Sarkis Kotchik, Santa Barbara County Association of Governments. A little bit of perspective, May of 2016, we had to delete $750 million in projects and delay $750 million. So it feels really good to be here today to talk about all these programs and implementing SB1. So thank you to CTC and your staff for expediting and implementing SB1. SB1 is huge for us, and we're getting the word out in our county to let people know about all the benefits for this, for our region. We're especially excited for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program. This is going to be an excellent opportunity for us to partner with the state to deliver critical multimodal improvements in the Santa Barbara US 101 multimodal corridor. Our corridor actually extends into Ventura County. We have, even though we're a small region, we do have a lot of congestion, and we feel that this program is going to allow us to deliver really important projects such as completing our HOV lane implementing commuter rail, and adding transit and bike ped improvements. So on behalf of Santa Barbara County, we are very thankful to the state for providing opportunities like congested corridors, and we are really excited to apply for not just this program, but all the SB1 programs. So thank you.
Thank you. Ron DeCascio. Ron?
DeCarly?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. Ron DeCarly, Executive Director, San Luis Obispo Council of Governments. We've long been a champion of comprehensive corridor planning, major investment studies. We've been applying it on Highway 101 in our corridor. We're really excited to see this included in SB1. We were a strong advocate when that program was being advocated. We think your staff has done a superb job in terms of trying to come up with some really good guidance. We concur with your staff. I think the primary issue should be congestion, and it should be multimodal. We believe these criteria and guidelines are extremely good, and we're very, very supportive. You've done an excellent job. How we apply those is going to be a different question. And it's very simple to say, we will go and apply this funding for a multimodal corridor program until you look at the different modes of transportation and you try and mesh that with a statewide program. We would be hoping that as you develop this criteria, that we look at multiple types of funding that we could bring forward, partnering with Caltrans, partnering with our county, our cities, our transit system, and not just focusing on this corridor, but focusing on transit money, on STP funds, on developer fees, on ATP, and trying to package that. So whatever scoring you could provide that provides that type of a total program that leverages all these other funding sources is, I think, the direction we probably should go. And again, I think your staff's done a superb job. And we're really happy to see this program go forward. We think it was one of the better opportunities we saw, improvements of SB1. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further speakers? The hearing is closed. Item 26, Teresa.
Commissioners, under item 26 is an action item. As previously mentioned, statute requires that no less than 30 days prior to adoption of the solutions for congested corridors, the Commission transmit the draft guidelines to the legislature. Staff recommends the Commission approve the submittal of the 2018 draft guidelines for the Solutions for Congested Corridors program to the required legislative committees by November 6, 2017. Noting any specific changes and delegating to the Executive Director the authority to make any modifications to the guidelines based on comments received by the October 24th workshop. Staff recommends the approval.
Motion by Fran Inman. Second by Commissioner Gardino. Further questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Chair, can I make a quick announcement to our stakeholders that if they're going to be providing us comments, I would need those comments as soon as possible so they can be discussed at the October 24th workshop. So if possible by Friday, by close of business on Friday. I know this is a short timeline, but our workshop is on Tuesday the 24th. Thank you.
Better read your homework.
Item 27. Stephen.
Thank you, Commissioners. Item 27 is the California Transportation Asset Management Plan. You all should have received this document. It's so hot and off the press that be careful opening it. You could burn your fingers. Now, you are very familiar with what's happening with asset management on the state highway system because you've taken a lot of action items already on it. You've approved the asset management guidelines. You've approved asset classes. You've also approved performance measures and targets for the bridges, culverts, pavements and transportation management system asset classes. This document not only addresses what's on the state highway system, but it also addresses what's on the national highway system, which includes local roads and bridges. And Mike Johnson, the state asset engineer, is going to present you the California Asset Management Plan.
Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, Assemblymen. I'm happy to be here today to present to you a draft of the first California Transportation Asset Management Plan. This plan is intended to satisfy the regulations established at the federal level under MAP 21 and carried forward in the FAST Act, as well as the requirements established in California Government Code under Senate Bill 486. This draft culminates about 2 years of effort. Many of the people in this room participated in a number of workshops that were held by Caltrans throughout the state over the last couple of years. And it also is a product of a lot of hard work by a very dedicated and small team of asset management folks in Caltrans and our consultant. So with that, I have a short presentation that is intended to kind of give you a highlighted tour of this 120 some odd page document. So first and foremost, what are the components of a transportation asset management plan? These items that are listed on the slide there are directly out of federal regulation. These items were also adopted by the Commission in their asset management guidelines a couple meetings ago. As Stephen mentioned, it's an important point to understand that when we look at the entire transportation system in California, you could generally put it into two pots, the state highway system and everything else on the local road system that is not the state highway system. The State Highway System Management Plan, which was brought before this commission a few months back, this document is really governing the investments in the shop at this time, and it applies to the entire state highway system. There were some aspects of those asset management components that I showed that were not in this document because they weren't ready at the time, but we felt it was important enough to go forward with this document because we wanted to push this into implementation within the shop immediately. Under federal regulations, they talk about the national highway system, and that's represented here by this little blue oblong shape there. That is, majority of it is on the state highway system, but then there's a portion of it that is on local streets and roads. And that, at the federal level, is being addressed here within this draft. So this was not in the State Highway System Management Plan, but it is included here, as well as the State Highway System requirements for asset management are also reproduced in this document. So you get a twofer. You get the State Highway System and the National Highway System in one document. One of the things we're required to do is establish an inventory and to establish a baseline condition for that inventory. For the state highway system, we have about 50,000 lane miles of pavement. When we look at the national highway system, the state's portion is only 36,000 lane miles, and then we've got about 19,500 lane miles of local roads. So on the national highway system perspective, it's about 65% state managed and 35% locally managed. That aspect of the national highway system view is what made the workshop so important, to get the feedback of the 35% that wasn't covered in the state highway system management plan. As far as conditions, we're required to establish the baseline conditions of the assets. This is just quickly showing a breakdown of the condition for pavement on the state highway system on the left pie chart, and on the national highway system on the right chart. Not much different. There's a little bit more fair, a little bit more fair pavement when we bring in the national highway system as opposed to the state. Pours about the same. When we look at bridges on the state highway system, there's about 246 million square feet of bridge deck area. And under federal regulation, the metric is area-based so that a bridge is not considered a bridge. You know, they're not all the same. So if we're talking about the Bay Bridge versus a little bridge that goes across a local road creek, they're proportionally weighted by their area. So on the state highway system, that was entirely covered within the state highway system management plan. It's all under the jurisdiction of Caltrans. On the national highway system, the state of California has ownership and management responsibilities of about 90% of all bridge deck area on the national highway system. Locals have about 10% of the bridge deck area. So it's a very different picture between pavements, which are 65-35, and bridges, which are 90-10. When we look at bridges, you can see the breakdown, and I won't read the slide here, but as we move to the national highway system, we see a little bit more poor in terms of bridge condition and a little bit more fair. So the conditions drop off a little bit when we look at the national highway system subset as opposed to the state highway system subset. Under Senate Bill 486 and subsequent commission actions, additional asset classes were added into the plan. Culverts being one of those, the distribution of culvert condition and the estimated number of culverts are shown on this slide. Additionally, the commission added transportation management systems. These are ramp meters, changeable message signs, detection, and others that help the operation of the highway system. The current condition of those are shown on this slide. Again, the culverts and TMS elements only apply to the state highway system, all under the jurisdiction of Caltrans. One of the things that the asset management plan does is establishes performance scenarios. And these are taking into consideration existing conditions, targets that were established, looking at the gap between where we are and where we want to be, looking at the financing available and coming up with projections of where we think we're going to be able to be. It's a good time to be in the asset management business because we have a lot of new money. The job would have been a lot harder about a year ago, but now with SB1, it's a joy to report that across the board, everything's going to get better. The degree at which it gets better, it may vary a little bit, but it's generally a very positive news story. The funding provided for both state highways and for local roads has improvement just across the board. Additionally, money for bridges and culverts on the state highway system will have a dramatic impact. Having said all of that, on the state highway system for the 4 core asset classes, which Caltrans has responsibility and is very near and dear to my position, we are committed to achieve the performance targets established by the Commission with the SB1 funding. One of the other chapters within the asset management plan looks at life cycle planning, and this is where you explore your practices and whether your practices are in the best long-term interest of the people of California. Are we making good choices in how we do pavement work or bridge work and when we do that work? So I've just given you some graphics. I didn't expect you to read them, but I wanted to highlight that there is this aspect to the asset management plan. Additionally, there's financial plans. For the state highway system, that is largely excerpts out of the commission-adopted fund estimate. For the national highway system, that was a much more challenging problem to solve. Primarily because neither Caltrans nor our local partners account for NHS spending separately from the overall spending that they have. In other words, this has not been a recognized subset of infrastructure that you could just go to and say, what did you spend on the NHS? This required us to do a proration of total spending to the NHS, and that in turn fed into the performance scenarios. The asset management plan includes a risk management chapter. We held workshops on this, and generally the risks were categorized into 7 different areas. Those 7 areas are shown here. There are specific risks that were identified, and those have at least initial thoughts on mitigation strategies for some of those risks. I wanted to talk a little bit about progress made, just because I know you like to have meetings that go long into the evening. But this is very important because we don't get a lot of opportunity to just reflect on what we've accomplished in this short period of time. The Commission has adopted asset classes and targets for those. There were supplementary asset classes adopted by the Commission. Those supplementary asset classes are all in the asset management plan, along with the inventory, condition, and recommended targets for the Commission to consider. As this has been going on, Caltrans has actually moved into the implementation phase for asset management with the shop being our largest program. And now that SB1 has in effect doubled the shop, it was more important that we get this out and working for us immediately. This resulted in changes in the way the shop funding is structured. We eliminated asset-based silos and have gone to a performance-driven funding structure. We have defined 10-year project portfolio that it would be, when those projects are completed, would get us to the SB1 performance targets with the budget that we have available. So in other words, we actually have a project level 10-year plan that is behind this performance. And then I'm also happy to report that beginning July 1, 2017, all new planning starts for the shop are in alignment with the performance plans established by asset management and this 10-year project portfolio. So we're planning the right work to ensure that we get the outcomes that we need at the end of the 10-year period in SB1. On top of that, the asset management process as a whole has led to significantly improved communication, I think, with our partners, and particularly the big partners that have large portions of the NHS, primarily SCAG, MTC, SANDAG, and SACOG. They're all big players in the national highway system. SCAG, for example, has about half of all the NHS pavement in the state of California. So we've been working closely with them, and those communications have been very positive. And then last, I guess not least on the project progress made, this asset management plan under Senate Bill 486 was required in 2020. I'm happy to give it to you 2.5 years early. As far as the last chapter in the asset management plan, as we've gone through all these workshops, a series of potential improvements have been identified. Those are captured in a chapter within the asset management plan. We are not in the plan itself trying to solve those problems, but rather just identify that there are opportunities here, and some of them are listed on the screen there. Last slide. For the next steps for the plan, we're providing it as a draft. It went live for public comment on Caltrans internet websites today. We have an online comment forum for this, and we also are asking formally for commission comments in your December meeting. We hope to receive those comments, update the asset management plan appropriately, and seek potential approval or adoption of the asset management plan at the January commission meeting. In April of 2018, the plan is required to be submitted to Vince and his staff in the California Division Office of Federal Highways. That deadline, if it is not met, comes with a substantial potential for loss of federal revenue statewide on both the state and local transportation systems. It's not a deadline I think we want to test, and so we're giving the commission, in effect, 2 swings at this. Potential adoption in January. If we still have unresolved items in January, we would be pushed to a March meeting. At that point, the commission would have to make a choice, either adoption or we potentially miss the federal deadline in April. So the timing was done this way to not put the commission's backs up against the wall in the adoption of this. So hopefully we can resolve all the comments between December and January and look forward to adoption at that time. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Fantastic.
Yes. Oh, shall I ask a question of Michael? Don't go home yet. And I don't know if this is for Michael or really for Stephen, but just out of curiosity, and I'm not going to say this well, so please forgive me for being the amateur. You guys are the experts. I'm fascinated, as particularly in Southern California, because so much of our sales tax dollars in a variety of counties are now being used to benefit state assets, the state highway system, be it improvements to the 405, you know, the 10, the 110, et cetera. Have you done an assessment of what the trend line has been for more local sources into the asset management of the state highway system, and obviously national's part of that? And my corollary is, and would you see that trend line changing because of SB1 money being available, or would it continue to increase? And then I have a follow-up. Does that make sense?
That's a loaded question.
Yeah, I know, and so Stephen, maybe Stephen should, you know.
I'll give you a short answer with respect to the finances. I mentioned in brief that it was very challenging to try to understand the funding that is actually available on the local national highway system. And the reason that's such a challenge is, as I mentioned, one, the agencies that are spending it can't tell you exactly how much goes to the national highway system, and nor can Caltrans. That's not a criticism. But the other part is that there's a variety of funding sources, most of which do not flow through Caltrans, or a number of them do not flow through Caltrans. So we asked them, we had to go to all these agencies and ask them, what do you anticipate having available to spend on pavement and on bridges and other things? And it's a tough question for them, because they're going through a process of a funding increase on the local system in terms of SB1. And in the case of Southern California specifically, they also have Measure M in that mix.
Right.
And then you've got self-help counties and non-self-help counties. It's a very complicated thing. In fact, it's one of the improvement areas that was identified in the plan to try to get a more consistent means of financial reporting. I have been doing some work with the group that's doing the local needs assessment, and they're going to bolster their surveys to probe that area a little bit more in their next go-around.
The tension I'm trying to get at, and maybe, as I said, I'm not going to say
The answer is no, you're not going to get your money back.
No, I don't want to get it back. But you know, the old saw is he who has the gold rules, right? And so if locals are investing to add managed lanes to state highway systems, and yet sometimes local Caltrans districts want to do more than maybe what locals want to do, there's a tension in asset management among agencies, some that might at the time have money and others that didn't at the time. And so what I'm trying to capture, does the state asset plan, management plan, does it also include a little paragraph that says, yeah, we have to manage with our local partners on how to manage state assets? It isn't just a state system. It's actually a system that is technically owned by the state, but kind of has to be managed by a lot of people. Does that make sense? I mean, Stephen, help me here.
Well, I think what you're really driving at is a lot of the local entities have been investing in the state highway system.
Correct.
Those investments currently have been to expand the system, not to maintain the system. The asset management aspect of these, what we're doing, is actually maintaining the existing system and infrastructure that we have. And yes, SB1 monies are now being given to the state and the locals to actually maintain and manage what we've got, not to be building new assets. As far as the locals, they are pretty much maxed out on their measures as to build new stuff. How will they be addressing the existing stuff? That is a big question mark.
Well, it does say operating, maintaining, and improving. So it's more than just maintaining.
Well, improving in the sense that if you have an asset that's deteriorating, you're going to improve it back to its original condition. You're not adding new assets to it. You're not taking a
yes, and I understand all
freeway
that.
to a six-lane freeway.
Yeah, no, I understand all that. But that's a kind of an interesting component that maybe is not here, is the need to make sure we work with our partners, because the system is more than just the state. The state owns and operates a state highway system, but it's the locals that actually use it. Yeah. Does that make sense,
Yes.
Michael?
Yes, it
okay.
makes sense to me.
Okay.
I will point out for you, Commissioner Dunn, that there is an assessment using the same performance measure across state and local systems for pavements and bridges. And I think you had requested that in a prior commission meeting. I want to let you know it's in here for the National Highway System.
Yay! I would love to see at some point
Well, we got to move.
the trend line on
Gotta move.
investment. I'm done. But
Thank you.
the trend line on investments.
Okay.
So, thank you.
Item 28.
Commissioners, item 28 is an action item requesting approval of an addendum to the adopted interim shop guidelines. These are the guidelines that the commission adopted at their June 2017 meeting. The addendum adds a requirement for a baseline performance plan with intermediate annual benchmarks for each asset. It is essential to have for the commission to effectively evaluate and report progress towards achievement of performance targets. The proposed addendum to the interim shop guidelines requires Caltrans to bring forward a baseline plan with benchmarks for commission consideration at the December 2017 meeting and update annually thereafter. Commission staff recommends the commission approve this addendum to the interim shop guidelines.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Modafer. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Stephen?
Yes, Commissioners, this takes us to the information calendar. The information calendar is the next 13 items, 24 through 41. The items are deemed not to raise any issues or concerns and will not be specifically addressed unless specifically requested by a commissioner. I will note that item 34 is the Caltrans Rail Operations Report. Commission staff will be asking the actual rail operators to show up at the December meeting and tell us about what's going on with their operations. Having said that, we'll move on to the consent calendar. The next 23 agenda items, 42 through 64, are the consent calendar. The following changes need to be noted. Under item 46, resolution of necessity, resolution C 21566, C 21568, and C 21569 have been withdrawn. Under item 48, director's deeds, deed number 14288-01-01 is also withdrawn. With these changes, staff recommends that you approve the consent calendar.
So moved.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Gardino. Questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it. Stephen, can we take 77, 78, and 79 in one fell swoop?
Yes, we can do the airspace leases next. We still have to do them individually, though.
Right.
All right.
Okay.
Under the, and just to remind the commissioners, and since we have a brand new commissioner, under airspace leases, Caltrans may lease to public entities or public agencies or private entities for any term not to exceed 99 years the use of areas above or below state highways. Except that in the case of leases with private entities, the lease shall only be made after competitive bidding unless the commission finds by unanimous vote that in certain cases, competitive bidding would be not in the best interest of the state. The next three leases are actually direct negotiated leases, so they do need a unanimous vote from the commissioners. Under item 77, this is a request. This is actually the approval of a lease for Saddle Valley Hospitals. The Saddle Valley Hospitals have leased this space since the 1970s. The commission has actually approved direct negotiations twice. There were disputes between appraisals between the hospital and Caltrans. Three appraisals were actually made. One was made by Caltrans that the hospital didn't quite accept. One was made by the hospital that Caltrans didn't accept. Finally, they went to a third independent party. They have now settled their differences on the appraisal, and staff will be recommending that you approve this directly negotiated lease with Saddle Valley Hospitals.
So moved.
Second. Who made the motion?
Gordino.
Gordino made the motion. Modaffert, second. Any questions? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? Ayes have it.
Okay, the next item 78 is a request to directly negotiate an airspace lease with the San Francisco Marin Food Bank. The food bank is actually expanding its operations in San Francisco. It needs to expand its warehouse onto the area that it actually now uses for parking of its volunteers. It would like to have the Caltrans airspace lease to have parking for their volunteers, so staff believes it is in the best interest of the state to directly negotiate with the food bank and allow them to secure possession of this airspace. Caltrans proposed a 15-year term at fair market value. The food bank has said in the letter requesting a 25-year lease term and less than fair market value. Staff can recommend to you that you do that you allow for the 25-year lease term, but you still have to stay with fair market value. The commission has no authority, no statutory authority to do anything else besides fair market value. With that, staff recommends that you approve direct negotiations with the San Francisco Marin Food Bank, 25-year lease term at fair market value.
Mr. Chair,
motion, but I'd like to comment.
Sure.
I think Caltrans, if you could do more than 15 years, I think it would really help these guys out. I know we can't do anything about fair market value, but I guess that depends on what kind of appraiser you get. Right now, I would move that you consider something longer, at least 25 years or maybe even longer.
I'll be offering a second to Commissioner Gilmetti's motion and underscoring. We hope that it would be 25 years at least. Again, we know that we cannot be a part of your negotiation on fair market value, but the critical role that this food bank plays in San Francisco and Marin, we hope that you will look at their vital role in our community for so many people who depend on their services.
Because of the letter you received, the book item does say 15 years. We'll leave that open-ended in our negotiations, understanding that they want 25 years. And we'll also at least legally research any ability that we have to, any flexibility on the fair market value. Any lease would have to come back to you for approval. This is only for approval for direct negotiation. So we'll look at both.
Can I just ask, I think, Stephen, you said 25 years, is that
Yes.
right? 25 years, fair market value?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, my question was why Caltrans was at 15, and I think Malcolm's kind of left it open there. So are we going to say up to 25 years, or are we going to mandate it's a 25-year lease?
I think whatever they negotiate, but 25 years would be, in my mind, a minimum.
Yeah, and mine as well. The maker and the seconder of the motion said 25 years at a minimum. Right.
I'm open to that.
Any other
Thank you.
questions?
Thank you, Malcolm.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 79, we have two speakers on this.
Yes, Commissioners. Item 79 is also a request to directly negotiate an airspace lease with SKS Partners in San Francisco. SKS Partners have leased their building, which is next to this airspace, to GM Cruise. GM Cruise is actually, GM stands for General Motors. They are going to be implementing their driverless vehicle program. They're going to be modifying the vehicles in the building. They need a secure location to park the vehicles. These vehicles have very expensive cameras and telemetry on them, so they need a secure location. The Governor's Office of Business Development has provided tax credits to GM Cruise to do these operations. GM Cruise will be increasing its employee base in San Francisco by at least 1,800 employees. So this is in the best interest of the state to lease this leasehold to SKS Partners. Staff would be recommending that you approve this direct negotiation.
Move approval.
Okay, there's a motion by Modesto, second by Gilmetti. You want to talk yourself out of yes? That's a big possibility here.
Chair Alvarado, no, I wanted just to thank both you, the commissioners, the CTC staff, and Caltrans for their hard work in bringing this matter in front of you. This is a very important parking lot for crews to store their vehicles in, and we want to, as a business in California, keep California at the forefront of this emerging technology. So thank you for your consideration.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Mark Watts on behalf of GM Cruise today. We've been collaborating with the tenant and pursuing this lease arrangement. And I just want to point out that the landscape has changed a bit since we embarked on this journey. There was a bill enacted that will allow San Francisco City to select parcels on the basis of well, they'll be able to select parcels and move forward with leases and bring them to the commission. So we intend to work very collaboratively with District 4, your staff, to bring a lease back as soon as we can, so we don't have the uncertainty of waiting to see what parcels may or may not include ours. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I think once we approve the direct negotiations, that should take care of it, right?
Yeah, I'll have to look into the legality of that. The new legislation doesn't kick in yet, but it allows City of San Francisco to have first dibs on a certain amount of parcels. But I just assume move expediently to resolving the negotiations and bringing the lease back.
Any further questions? You're interrupting negotiations here. We're burning daylight.
Yeah.
If I could, Mr. Chair, I would only ask Mark and you guys to come back perhaps in 6 months or what have you, to update the commission on what you're doing, as the commission's been very interested in technology, autonomous vehicle deployment and those things.
Okay.
And I think it would be great to continue to get an update.
And
Sure,
Mr.
it'd be
Chair.
our pleasure to come back and give you an update.
Thank you.
And Mr. Chair, from what we've heard, my only comment would be if there's a way that we can bring this back as those negotiations go on at our December meeting, that would be helpful.
And I just want to bring it back to our last discussion about our asset management plan. And as we looked at our TMS category, we had some deficits in terms of the functioning with our communications. So I do think as we move into the world of technology, that asset class, we're going to have to make sure that that's pretty high performing, or we'll get into some real trouble.
Any other questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Item 65, Jose.
Sure. Good afternoon, Chair, Commissioners, and members of the public. Item 65 is an action item. This is a request to provide comments in response to the recirculated draft environmental impact report for the I-710 corridor project in Los Angeles County. Staff has prepared a draft letter to be sent to Caltrans, and staff recommends your approval.
Second.
Motion by Yvonne, second by Modesto. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 66.
Item 66 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Interstate 10 corridor project in Los Angeles and San Bernardino counties. Caltrans certifies that the environmental impacts have been mitigated to less than significant levels. Staff recommends your approval.
Motion by Tavaloni, second by Burke. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Item 67.
Item 67 is an action item. This is the final EIR for the Interstate 5 State Route 65 interstate project in San Diego County. Caltrans adopted a statement of overriding considerations, finding that the benefits outweigh the impacts. Staff recommends your approval.
So moved.
Motion by Dunn, second by Tavaloni. Questions? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Ayes have it. Before we adjourn tonight, we have a public speaker on public comment, Eileen Boken.
It's
Eileen Boken, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. However, I am here speaking on my own behalf. I am here encouraging CalSTA and Caltrans to develop innovative solutions in the following areas. Developing real-time interfaces between onboard cameras on transit vehicles and those inside law enforcement vehicles to ticket moving violations such as California Vehicle Code 21756A. This could be automated on the back end only, with the traffic stop still being performed by law enforcement. This hopefully could be implemented without enabling legislation from the state. Developing the use of holographic images or other technologies for LRVs, such as Taravel Street in San Francisco, which would form visual barriers in order to stop traffic as passengers board and alight LRVs. Taravel LRVs travel in the middle lanes during street operations. These holographic images or other technologies could be used in conjunction with onboard cameras to assist law enforcement with CVC 21756A violations. Develop the use of holographic images or other technologies for pedestrian safety, which would identify pedestrians to drivers, such as images that would amplify the size of pedestrians in crosswalks. I am urging the CTT to also contact the Caltrans Traffic Control Devices Committee regarding the use of streetcar stencils on street surfaces at transit stops for LRVs. This could be used in neighborhood commercial and transit corridors, such as Taravel Street in San Francisco, to improve the visibility of LRV stops. Streetcar stencils would be far more effective than other solutions, such as wording on street surfaces. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Commissioners, I'm going to ask you if we can go back and clarify that Agenda Item 67 is related to Interstate 5 and State Route 56, not State Route 65. And so if we can amend that motion to ensure that this is clear. Yeah, who is the maker of this motion?
Commissioner Dunn.
Commissioner Dunn. So can, I guess to clarify, staff is recommending your approval of this, okay.
Yes.
Okay, okay. So who seconded?
Commissioner Tavoloni.
Okay, so.
Everything's good?
Everything's good? Okay. And we need a vote.
Everything's good.
Okay.
We are. All right.
All in favor.
You know, we'd like to, before we adjourn, we'd like to adjourn in memory of those folks that perished in all the fires. I mean, we had some in Southern California too, and just wish those that are facing that long, long journey back to recovery Godspeed.